Hey, it's T. Frank, host of the BWI Daily Edition. Interesting things happened yesterday with our show. You might have noticed the normal routine of things was not the way we did it yesterday. Breaking news happened in the afternoon with Tomarrion Parker decommitting from the Nittany Lions. So when we normally would have our recruiting show, we did a breaking news segment. But we want to make sure we still get you all of that information, even if it's the next day. So what we're going to do now is to address that particular topic here on the show. Ryan and I are going to start. Ryan Snyder, recruiting insider for Penn State and for Blue White Illustrated. And we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into the regularly scheduled show that we had for yesterday that we had to postpone today because of everything that went on. So, Ryan, thanks for coming on and doing this with us. And we can get a little more context from what we had yesterday about TJ Parker after you've had a day to digest, to talk, and to get some information, some intel. So can you give us a little bit more of what happened and led to this particular situation for Penn State?
Same story, another day, kind of. I mean, it's Penn State is recruiting on a high level, all right, and they do a great job identifying guys. But there are a handful of schools out there that are recruiting on a higher level, and when those schools drop down a peg to where Penn State's top guys are, this is what you're kind of seeing. And right now, Tomarrion Parker hasn't committed elsewhere or anything like that, but I think all the tea leaves are pointing to Georgia here. Look, Georgia was in on him very early. He visited Georgia quite a few times, I believe it was. I want to say even last year. I think he was at 2 games for them last year, at least 1 game last year. And then we did a junior day. I think he was there in the summer as well. And then went there in March. And it felt, I mean, everybody was kind of thinking Georgia was going to be the school for a while. Something changes in the spring. I assume I don't cover Georgia every day, but I would assume, they had a few guys they missed out on. And, as they moved down their board, and Tomarrion Parker was still certainly a quality prospect that was on their board. It feels like maybe he has gotten the green light from them. I don't 100% know that. That's just kind of the chatter amongst colleagues and people that I've talked to. So we'll see. I mean, Florida, Tennessee are both still in the mix. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he did take some more visits. But to me, this feels like just, again, especially with Georgia, taking Josh Miller from Penn State, taking Ejani Haynes from Penn State. This feels like another one of those situations where, Georgia's just kind of found quite a few guys that are very high on Penn State's board, and they're defending national champs, guys. This is going to happen.
This is the question, and obviously that context to yesterday and some of the questions that were pouring in from social media here on our YouTube channel. Some people wanted to know, what is this staff failing to do? And it just, sometimes there are other programs, as you pointed out, that are higher on the food chain. Shocking, Penn State is not the highest place on the food chain. So is there a tactic they need to change? Because you always want to go for the best player, right? And TJ Parker was one of the best players on their board, and they secured his commitment. You don't want to go after worse players to secure them and make sure they get to your program. So what is the path forward when you're in the situation of being very good, as you pointed out, at recruiting, and then other teams, when they drop down off of their top guys, is there anything they can do in these situations to mitigate what's happening?
Yeah, a lot. Win. Let's start with that. I mean, you have back-to-back 500 seasons in the Big Ten. I mean, look, they're recruiting at a high level despite that, but Penn State's here, Georgia's here. I don't need to explain this to everybody watching that. You guys get that, okay? I mean, Georgia right now, in my opinion, is on pace to be the team of the decade. Now, of course, you got Alabama around. Will Nick Saban stay forever? But if I had to pick a school that's going to be the school we talk about a lot in this decade, it's probably going to be Georgia, because Kirby Smart's not going anywhere. So that's a big part of it. And then look, we can't beat around the bush on the NIL perspective. And I don't know if NIL is playing a role in this. Tamir Robinson had a very interesting tweet yesterday about 5 minutes before this all broke of, hey, we keep losing guys to NIL. Then he deletes it, and then poof, look at that. 5 minutes later, Tomarrion Parker decommits. I don't know. What do y'all think? I mean, I think that's pretty interesting, right?
But look, and this is what you said. This is what you talked about. At the back half of 2023, we are going to see things happen that we haven't seen before. And maybe it is that it's just Georgia, but maybe not. Maybe it's not that it's just Georgia, and there are other things at play.
There are a lot of Southern schools right now, guys, paying for recruits there are a lot of northern schools not paying for recruits. That's how it is right now. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, they're all in the same boat. I mean, yes, they have collectives set together and stuff, but they're not inducing players for recruiting. I mean, Ryan Day's been outspoken about it. A lot of Michigan people have been outspoken about it. I think Notre Dame's kind of in the same boat too. I mean, it's just it's like a civil war, south of Virginia. A lot of people are doing whatever the hell they got to do to get recruits on campus right now. And it's just the reality of the situation. So, I think if you're a top prospect and a top Southern school comes calling, Marcus Stokes, for example, is, I mean, no doubt in my mind, Marcus Stokes got something from Florida. I don't know what, but we had all that talk about Jaden Rashada. I mean, there had to have been something there. So you got schools down south that are pushing this NIL collective to a whole new level, because really, sure, it's not supposed to be a recruiting inducement, but I don't know how you ever enforce that. And I think these schools know that. And then you have the Big Ten schools up north that haven't gone to that level yet. But at some point, they're either going to have to, or you get some congressional things that can not blur the lines as they are now. And then maybe we'll get a better perspective on things. But that has to be a part of it. And then winning and everything else that goes into it.
And Georgia is a particularly good fit for TJ Parker, too. And just a quick review of what Penn State is losing. He does fit a lot of what they like to do at Georgia on defense as kind of a stand-up, pass-rushing linebacker. I know that was something, at the very least, was a part of his conversation early in the process. I don't know how much of that. But a good pass rusher with good hand usage and has, I think, some ability to drop. I still think he's a majority pass rusher. He's not going to be a hybrid guy that is playing, off-ball linebacker, but that he does fit really well what they want to do with kind of a four-down defense that does keep a lot of their defensive ends up, in a two-point stance. And that's a lot of what he does at the high school level. So for him, it makes sense, too, where he was going to transition to a full hand-in-the-dirt kind of guy at Penn State. But here at Georgia, I think he gets to continue doing what he was doing previously, and he's going to be able to go in and play a similar brand of football. I still think from a perspective of he's got some work to do here. So if he's going to Georgia and he's going to be in that room, he's got to clean up some of his technique and some of the ability to play with a lower pad level, because if you're going into that environment, you've got to be able to do everything really well. He's a high floor guy, but is he a high ceiling guy for Penn State? I thought he was a great fit. I don't know what Georgia has in the room or what they're bringing in, but he does feel like a guy that could play, but maybe is never the star if Georgia's being, getting more and more freaks on that defense over time. But either way, that's kind of my view of what he does there. For Penn State, I asked Greg this. I'll ask you again. What's the going forward? You can't just sit here and, spin in your misery. What's next for Penn State? Can they rebound from this? Maybe not with the same level of player, but another quality player to add in the class.
We're in a dead period right now where preseason has the vast majority of focus. So yeah, they'll be scouting guys, they'll be doing stuff like that. But until September rolls around and players get on campus and you start building that one-on-one relationships, it's not really an answer that I think you're going to get in the near future. Just like the offensive tackles. I mean, I know they've been in touch with Caleb Luma a little bit out of the Phoenix area, but
who I love, by the way.
Yeah, he's a good player.
Yeah.
Until guys visit, they gotta visit, and you got to get that relationship going on a personal perspective to have really any chance. So it's just it's going to take some time to figure that out. I mean, I expect Jalen Thompson to end up at Michigan State. Jalen Thompson was always going to go to Michigan State, and Michigan State didn't stop recruiting him.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's funny, man. Like everybody at Penn State was like, "Hey, we're in a great spot. We're in a great spot." Okay, I put in a pick, and then like 24 hours later, Michigan State's like, "Hey, come on back to campus, buddy." I was like, "Son of a," anyway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would think Dylan Gooden maybe from Good Counsel. They've been kind of, the way it's been described to me is they like Gooden. They're kind of keeping him at an arm's length, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
they want to see his
that makes
season.
Total sense.
Last year's season wasn't the best, but he has a lot of freakish qualities that they like. So Dylan Gooden would be someone to watch. But again, like I talked about, actually, we're going to talk about you on the show you're about to watch here after us that we did yesterday. I mean, he's got a lot to like. Is he a linebacker? Is he a defensive end? I think Penn State's room or coaching staff is torn on that still. So Dylan Gooden is kind of coming back in the mix. I could see him becoming a player we're going to be talking about more. But more names will emerge with time. The one thing I want to bring it back to with the Georgia thing you were talking about a little bit ago. I think T.J. Parker would be fine there. I think Josh Miller would be fine there. Yazeed Haynes is the only one where it's like, if Fran Brown wasn't an assistant coach there, I don't know if Yazeed Haynes ends up at Georgia. I think Yazeed Haynes is a hell of an athlete. He proved that during camp this year. But like from a hands perspective and stuff, he's just not a natural pass catcher. I mean, he's still kind of a project player. Fran Brown is from Camden, New Jersey. He was the assistant coach at Rutgers for a while. Like there was a real relationship there with Yazeed ahead of time, and then he comes to camp and crushes it. I think that's how that all got kickstarted. But T.J. Parker, I mean, he is a quality player that I would think fit in fine there. Like you said, I don't know if he's going to be the next superstar there, but he should play there. And then like I said, Josh Miller I think was incredibly underrated, and I think fans are going to, our scouts are going to see that this season. So. Hey, it is what it is. I mean, we'll keep an eye. We've got to keep an eye on Dakari Nelson too. Dakari Nelson had a great relationship with Tomarrion Parker. He goes to Ole Miss. Dakari always said he wants to visit schools during the season, then makes a quick commitment, which came right after Tomarrion Parker, who they have a good relationship with. That's another one we're going to have to keep an eye out, I think, moving forward. So something to watch. I just, again, with this NIL world and the southern-northern divide there and the money that's being thrown around, this isn't going to be the last guy that decommits. Yeah. It is what it is.
Well, first off, thank you for cleaning up some of my verbiage there on T.J. Parker. I think that crystallized what I was trying to say about him at Georgia, and I think that's a very fair point. And secondly, thanks for giving Penn something to keep Penn State fans up at night. That last little foreboding, foreshadowing. You're right, though. You're absolutely right. Right.
Look, I mean, Penn State's a great fit for these guys, right? Wherever. I mean, but if a school comes around and says, hey, I give you $100,000 when you get here, how do you pass that up? I mean, Penn State can't do that, or Penn State's not doing that. Yeah. Again, neither is Ohio State, neither is Michigan, neither is Notre Dame. It's this southern-northern divide that we're seeing right now between Big Ten schools and SEC schools, and SEC schools are all in on it. And until somebody gets popped, I don't see it slowing down at all. So
we'll look out for SMU. They're making a comeback. That'll do it for this segment here. Stay tuned. Coming up directly after this is the BWI Daily Recruiting Show, as you know it, with both Greg and Ryan. So, by the way, stay tuned for Friday, where Ryan and I will be back. We're giving a preview of 2024 and the players that Penn State is going to fight to keep in the next cycle. Right. So it never ends.
He's Ryan Snyder, and I'm Greg Pickel, and it's a new edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show, Tuesday, August 9th. Penn State is already a week into summer camp, Ryan, and as we all know, that means things slow down pretty good on the recruiting trail with high school camps and preseason practices picking up as well. So today we're going to focus on the class of 2023 and where things stand there. But first, I wanted to hit on some news that broke in that is not related to recruiting, but a little bit before we started recording here on Tuesday afternoon. Ryan, ESPN is out of the running for Big Ten media rights, and obviously that was something you wrote a story about at Blue White Illustrated on Monday when Sports Business Journal reported it, the likelihood of that being the case. So my real quick thought here to get things going is, how strange is it going to be when CBS has the Big Ten and ESPN has the SEC, and there's also this mix mash of Big Ten media partners that include NBC, include CBS, from what we've been told, Fox, of course. It's going to look a lot different and sound a lot different and feel a lot different, but there's no question that when we sit here and talk about Penn State wanting to get more recruiting department people and better amenities and facilities and things like that, guess what? These TV contracts are where the money comes from. And so the Penn State is about to profit in a big way, as is every other Big Ten school, when this TV deal finally gets announced. And I think, Ryan, it's safe to say that we're pretty close to that deal probably being announced now that ESPN's out.
Yeah, I would think, definitely early next week. If we don't know this by next Tuesday, I'd be a little surprised. The thing that really stood out to me last night was Andrew Marchand tweeting out that CBS is going to pay, was it $350 million just
Yes.
for the 3:30 games? And think about that, guys. That's $350 million for what, like 13 games, 14 games or something like that through the course of the year. So that's wild to me, just that number, because I think the ESPN contract for all the SEC is like $300 million, and ESPN's getting multiple games per year, of course, with that deal, because they can run them throughout the day, where CBS is paying for just a handful of games every day or every time at 3:30, I guess it'll be. Of course, NBC, a lot of talk about them being the primetime game. I'll be curious to see, Notre Dame plays some primetime games too. So it's not like NBC can put it 3:30, because that'll be CBS's window. So what happens there when, Notre Dame plays a primetime kind of game? I'll be curious to see how that shakes up. Maybe that's when they go to Peacock or something. Who knows? But yeah, we are definitely getting close to this deal being done. $100 billion, or excuse me, $1 billion, not $100 billion.
Right.
$1 billion for a year. It's just an incredible number. I mean, these teams, I don't know if they're going to be making over $100 million a year. Of course, there's 14, will be 16 teams in the Big Ten soon enough, but getting paid what, 80, 90 million a year is the kind of money you need to, especially Penn State needs to make some of the improvements in a lot of different ways. So it's a great day if you're a Big Ten fan of any of these schools. It's going to go a long way in the long run, and I think we should see something here soon. The one thing I will say is I've talked to people about this. Fox's A package is going to be getting a lot of those 5 million and plus viewer games. So of course, the whiteout game is always a massive one. I mean, basically whenever Penn State plays Ohio State or Michigan, I expect Fox to be having those games in the foreseeable future, unless those teams really drop off and they fall down the pecking order a bit. So whether Fox down the road switches away from Big Noon or not, we'll see. Of course, when the inventory goes down eventually and all these conferences or the SEC and Big Ten kind of take over like we expect, there won't be such a deep window in a primetime window, of course. So maybe down the road Fox puts some games down there. But if you're a Penn State fan, I think you need to expect big noon kickoffs for these Ohio State and Michigan games here in the years forward. Of course, this deal doesn't start in 2023. It starts, not 2022. It'll start in 2023. So we'll see in the years ahead. But those primetime whiteout games, if you want it to be Ohio State and Michigan, I think you're going to run into an issue there.
Yeah, so obviously Penn State fans had plenty of debate going on when Minnesota was picked as this year's whiteout game opponent. But to your point, we may see that moving forward, because Fox is not going to back away from putting its best games at big noon, as long as the ratings are good. And as we just talked about, Ryan, and I know that T. Franks talks about it on the Daily as well, they get really good numbers for that. And I know Penn State fans don't necessarily love it. A lot of other college football fans don't necessarily love it. But when you're paying that kind of money for a rights package, you're going to put it where you can make the most money back with viewership and advertising. And right now it seems like big noon's the ticket there. So Penn State and everybody else is going to have to figure out how to adjust from a game theme perspective, but also a recruiting perspective too, because we know how much easier it is for prospects to get to a campus for a night game as opposed to a noon game, especially if they play the night before on Friday. So we'll see. I'll be very curious to see how that all plays out, but there is no question that fans, coaches, and recruits alike are all going to have to adjust to this new reality.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll be interested. I can't wait to get the numbers on this and dig through it and see how it all shakes out in the end. But of course, there's a lot of talk about Amazon. I don't know if Amazon or Apple really are going to be in it. We'll see. There's talk that they still are. I've heard mixed things there on whether there will be a streaming component. I mean, we know Peacock will have some sort of streaming component with the NBC deal, right, part of this. But and of course Fox, they have their streaming app as well. But if Amazon or Apple try to get that C package, I guess it would be in maybe some Thursday night Ohio State at Rutgers kind of games. That's what would make the most sense there. So we'll see how it shakes out, but it's looking pretty clear right now. CBS, NBC will be that B package, and then, like I said, Fox is going to have the vast majority of those 4 million and up kind of viewer games. They're going to get the pick from the best of the best at the very top there. So just get used to that, Penn State fans. It's something I think you're going to at least see in the next couple of years, and then maybe when the primetime window isn't as deep as it is now, and teams go to different conferences, maybe Fox will change some things up.
All right, well, let's dive into some specific recruiting talk on this week's edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. Ryan, you were able to confirm a new official visitor for Penn State over the weekend, a prospect who will be on campus a little bit later this year. And it's interesting because in so many past August, we'd be sitting here trying to map out who was coming for official visits in the fall. And now, of course, so many of those have already been used. So I think it certainly has changed quite a bit with the spring and summer official visits, but we'll still see a couple of them every fall, and this year's no exception. Let's get into who's coming and what Penn State fans need to know.
Yeah, Penn State's used about a little over half their official visits so far. So they still have a pretty deep inventory. A lot of guys, set visits. At one point, it was looking like they'd used 45, maybe not quite to get to 50. Of course, you're only allowed to use, I think it's 56, and then Penn State can roll over 6 from last year. So their number will really be 62 official visits. But the point there is they still have a good high 20s, low 30s, somewhere in that ballpark. But Zion Tracy, St. Thomas More prospect. He's a post-grad player. He was a 2022 prospect, was at one point committed to Temple. Temple goes through that whole coaching change last year, and I don't know if other schools just didn't jump on him quick enough or what, but he decides to be a 2023 player, go to St. Thomas More, which you see regularly. I mean, St. Thomas More and those New England schools, they have a lot of postgraduate guys. But that move has really worked out for Zion, no doubt. Comes to Penn State's camp, runs a 4.35 40, a 4.28 shuttle. I think Penn State fans have seen those numbers by now. A 32.6 triple broad is a pretty damn good number too. Of course, he did it the same at Georgia. One thing I realized after he came to Penn State's camp was that I think the numbers he put at Georgia and then him putting that on Twitter is what sparked Penn State to try and get him back up on campus at the end of July. Zion did camp at Penn State last year, put up good numbers, it was mid 4.4s, but didn't have these kind of 4.35, speed kind of crazy numbers that we saw at camp 2 weeks ago. So those numbers sparked Penn State in inviting him back for an official visit. Penn State isn't bringing players for official visit if they're not serious about being a take. Right now, there's no public offer out there, but I don't think he's been officially offered. But I think there's got to be something behind the scenes here saying, "Hey, look, come up for this official visit, and we're gonna be serious about taking you." So we'll see how that all lines up. But he's coming for that Ohio game, which is interesting because you never really see big visitors for those first, the directional
right.
Michigans and the Ohio, those MAC games. So he'll certainly be the most intriguing visitor that weekend, or at least I would expect looking back on previous years. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if he comes up for that visit and, we get a commitment tweet, Sunday afternoon, something like that when his visit wraps up. So let's see how it shakes out. There, like I said, Penn State hasn't officially given him an offer yet, but there's something behind the scenes there that tells me that that's in the works, and they want him to come up for this official visit to kind of make it all official, if that makes sense.
Yep. Zion Tracy, a class of 2023 recruit, stands 5'11", 170. He has only been rated so far by Rivals, which gives him a 3-star ranking. So I'm sure we'll see him pop up in the on-3 consensus a little bit later in the year once some more rankings or updates are done. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of the big takeaway for me reading your story, and the interview you did with him is at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where if you're not a subscriber, you can find it for $1 for 1 year of access to insider recruiting notes, premium team updates all throughout camp and all year long, and much more. So check that out. But yeah, the date caught my eye because there's not many players, period, usually, who are of the scholarship variety who come to those early season non-conference games. I mean, either it's usually guys who live close by or maybe underclassmen who only played on Friday night and they were done early and they were able to get up there. But for the most part, there's not usually too many of those. So the fact he wants to come then, I think, probably says all you need to know, Ryan, about his interest in Penn State. And then obviously the vice versa part of that being that Penn State feels the need to host him at this point in time. So this should be one we have to watch closely, I would think.
One thing I'll add too is that date to me is Penn State wanting to just get him back immediately. And maybe it's because, so unlike a lot of these guys who have camped this year, Zion has been putting his numbers on Twitter. And I think if you ask Georgia and Penn State, they probably would not prefer that he's putting those numbers on Twitter because, of course, schools are going to see that. So that's interesting to me. The fact that Penn State wants to get him back immediately kind of tells me that, of course, he does that and it goes into a dead period, so schools can't get him back. He does have an official visit set to Syracuse for the end of October. If he takes that visit, I'd be a little surprised. I mean, I think there's a real chance Penn State's going to get him back as soon as they possibly can. And like I said, just reading the tea leaves here, it feels like they want to get him here, have a good weekend, feel him out a little bit more, maybe get a better feel for his family. I don't know if Zion's family came with him for that visit, so that's probably a big part of it. And then, of course, just get that quality time, too. He came for a camp. Of course, he got to speak with the staff, maybe see a couple things, but it wasn't that quality time that you get during an official. So get him back here. Everything checks the boxes. We know as an athlete, he's got everything you want there. I could see him being maybe the 19th commitment in this class. Maybe somebody will pop before them, but I think it's looking pretty likely that Zion Tracy is going to be a Nittany Lion.
Let's stay in the class of 2023, but move to the other side of the ball. Obviously, all Penn State fans know now that Jaxon Smolik is the name to watch at quarterback for Penn State and a few other schools in the class of 2023. Had a very good showing at the Elite 11, which is unfortunately for Tulane, made his commitment to them something that many don't think is going to last much longer, but we'll see. What's the latest with him? Should we be expecting anything soon there, or is this something that's going to take a little bit more time to play out than maybe most people expect it once these offers start rolling in?
Yeah, so first off, awesome talk with Jaxon Smolik. I got to talk to his dad last week too, so we're getting a good relationship there. That was my first extended talk, which, by the way, happened at like midnight. So, thank you, Jaxon, for calling me. Of course, he's at Central Time, but I think he's just incredibly busy. He's getting ready for the season, and said he has all these coaches calling and whatnot. But we stayed up late one night and had an awesome talk, and just really impressive young man. I mean, if anyone who read that Q&A, I think you get the vibe right away that he's got his head on his shoulders, and no matter where he ends up, he's going to be a leader in whatever locker room it is. So Penn State has made it clear, yes, he has an offer. And right now, it really just kind of feels like a wait and see if any other schools pop. He told me that Wisconsin and Notre Dame are showing interest, and I think there's others too that maybe he just hasn't kind of put out there yet. I think that I even think that there's some Power Fives who maybe have offered and he hasn't put out there yet. I don't know that for sure, but I've heard that from other people. So let's see. Maybe I would think give it another week or so. This time next week, kind of get a better feel for if any other schools offered. He's not putting offers out there publicly either. So this is going to be one of those things where maybe you have to dig with Penn State sources or wherever it may be to figure out who's there, because he's committed to Tulane. He's trying to do all the right things. Like I said, he's a very classy individual. So I think you got to respect that. But do I see him ending up at Tulane? No. He's getting Power 5 offers now. I think he absolutely understands that you have to accept that. So I would definitely give Penn State the pole position, right? I mean, they were the first Power 5 school to really push hard and get him on campus and all those things, get his interest mainly. But again, if Notre Dame wants him to come visit in September, or Wisconsin wants him to come visit in September, could that impact his timeline? He's saying his timeline is to have it done before your senior season, which is great. Yeah, everybody wants to get that done. But
right.
If you can wait 3 more weeks, maybe go to Notre Dame, go to Wisconsin, maybe get another offer or two, check out those environments. Personally, if it was my son, I'd try and get him to wait. You don't want it to drag into October and have this going on your whole senior season. But if you can deal with a couple tough weeks of trying to juggle school, your season, and maybe a couple of visits on the weekend, this is a massive decision, right? And if you're getting offers and opportunities that you didn't have previously, I just would personally be surprised if he just said, screw it, we're going to Penn State. But of course, we got to see if those offers come. He's not really putting it out there publicly, so we're just going to have to try and juggle this and find as much information as we can over the next week or two.
So Jaxon Smolik, of course, is someone who, as quarterbacks, if you look across the country in terms of some of the higher rated classes, there's more than you might expect without a quarterback right now. And so what Ryan's getting at there is simply the fact that there's every reason that he could see his stock rise even more, maybe especially if he waits to decide until he has a couple games of senior tape on film. I mean, that could obviously change things for schools as well who want to see it in pads after seeing it at the Elite 11 in various camps. So we'll see. But I think it's fair to say Penn State can feel fairly decent about where it stands there, but there's certainly quite a bit of work to do here before everything could be said and done. I think that's probably the easiest way to leave that conversation.
Right. I mean, I would think, I hate percentages, right? No percentages always get you in trouble, right? But you would think Penn State's a pretty heavy favorite. I wouldn't say 90 or 95%, but to me, it's kind of like a 75%. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But say Wisconsin offers Thursday night in a private interview, and maybe Notre Dame were to offer a week later. Who knows? Maybe they already have. You got a lot to think about then, because you can't visit right now, but you got 2 heavyweights offering you. You want to get it done before your senior season, which starts, I think, end of August, early September. But man, they get on campus for a couple of those games and get around the coaching staff, and then you have more to think about. So let's see how it shakes out. But this is Penn State's, should be Penn State's to lose with the efforts they put in so far. And of course, Penn State's only going to keep strengthening those relationships. So we'll see. I think this is going to be one of those things where, like, boom, one day we just kind of get a surprise and he's committed to somewhere, or maybe it'll drag out a little bit longer and he's going to pop up at Wisconsin one day, and everything will be a little bit different then. So we'll do our best to stay on top of it.
Well, it's the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. We're moving through some class of 2023 updates. And obviously with Penn State now at 18 verbal commitments and the season almost here, Ryan, I don't think we're expecting to see a whole bunch of movement coming over the next couple of weeks or months. I mean, there's going to be a couple of names that pop up here and there. But for the most part, it feels like we know what the board looks like, and we're maybe waiting to see some senior tape and things like that. And perhaps that will lead Penn State to some more offers. But we figured it was a good time to just give a quick rundown of where things stand in terms of where Penn State could go next, what it's going to try and do to finish out this class. I had a chance to talk with Taylor Stubblefield and Terry Smith at Penn State Media Day last weekend, and both were pretty adamant that they're happy with where this class is right now, but that there is still work to be done, and that should be no surprise to anyone considering we're sitting here talking on the second Tuesday in August. But yeah, ultimately, I think Penn State knows that it's on the right track in the class of 2023. It currently sits inside of the top 10 of the On3 consensus team rankings, but there's some work to be done here, both with, committed guys who might have interest in checking things out this fall, and then uncommitted guys who obviously Penn State's pushing to land, and or maybe committed guys that they could flip from other schools. So there's still plenty going on in this class, but it certainly is getting full quickly, and there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, they missed out on a lot of important players that came up to Penn State in June, and that at the time we were looking at like, man, all you got to do is land a couple of these guys and you're set. And of course, Jason Moore goes to Ohio State, LeBlanc goes to Oklahoma, Evan Link goes to Michigan. Kavion Keys is one of those guys who's still out there. I think the tea leaves are all pointing to North Carolina. We talked about this last week. He goes to North Carolina. Right. He had a decision, right, at the end of July. He could have saw a new school in Florida. He could have came to Penn State, could have came to North Carolina. He chose North Carolina. I mean, 90% of the time, if you're doing a visit that last weekend, that's probably the school you're going to commit to if you're committing before the season starts, of course. So that tells me a lot there. Jakeem Jackson, of course, goes to Florida. I mean, they got Tony Rojas, they got Tamir, and they got London, and all three of those are incredibly important, all four-star players. Of course, they got Elliott Washington, too. I don't want to forget about that. But then Trey Webb, Cam Seldon, Stanton Rammel. I mean, there were a lot of quality guys there that they missed out on. And really, Kavion Keys Carmelo Taylor too, but Kavion Keys is, when it comes to four-star players, is pretty much the only one on that list. So when you go down and look at it, they needed another one or two of those guys, I felt, if they really wanted to put themselves in a position to absolutely have a top 10 class. They are now 10th. So they're right on the bubble there as far as maybe potentially dropping out. But again, I think Keys is going to North Carolina. I think Carmelo Taylor, so he's saying South Carolina, but then he goes to Virginia Tech too. And part of me thinks he's saying Penn State, South Carolina to maybe build some suspense and ended up being Virginia Tech. But either way, I think Penn State's third there. I would still probably put Virginia Tech and South Carolina ahead of them. And there's a lot that has to shake out. Somebody's got to emerge from tackle. And I was trying to dig on that last night, actually. And they were like, look, we got to figure out who gets on campus. I mean, there's guys. We wrote a preview last week, or just where does Penn State look from here as far as offensive line targets. And Penn State fans can read that on our site. But there are certainly names that they're monitoring. But none of these guys are surefire prospects. So you have to think that they're going to watch some games early in the season. Of course, they'll be trying to get guys to visit. But I think that one's just going to drag out a bit. I don't know if it'll be like a Vega Ione thing where they get guys incredibly late in the process. But I don't see any surprise tackles jumping on board unless they flip somebody that we're unaware of right now. But when I look across, they got to get a quarterback, right? So that's one of those spots. I feel like another wide receiver, at least one more wide receiver has to happen. Let me think. At least one more offensive lineman has to happen. So we're looking at three on the offensive line on the offensive side that have to happen. One guy I haven't talked about enough probably in the last week or two because I've been moving is Dylan Gooden, who really wasn't in the mix much at all with Penn State throughout early part of the summer. And then Dylan comes to the 7-on-7, and that's a really good workout. And he's
he looked really good that day.
Too. He did. We have him at 6'4", about 200. He's probably a little over that now. Maybe we're closer to 210 or so. But keep an eye on him because, like, from basically everything I was told, like last season just wasn't the greatest. Of course, they were watching Good Counsel a ton with Neo. Neo then ends up playing defensive end, and there was some talk that he looked like the better defensive end prospect. But I guess Penn State's going to probably miss out on Jalen Thompson too. Where do they go there as far as getting another spot on the defensive line? There's just more and more talk that they're interested in Gooden. I wouldn't say they're pushing for Gooden at the moment, but he's coming back more into the mix now. So keep an eye on him as far as a defensive line, maybe a linebacker. I don't have a great feel for where I think Penn State's staff is pretty mixed on that, if I'm being very blunt about it, because I've asked one person, they told me linebacker, that's another, they told me defensive end. So I think they kind of have to sort that out. But there's a lot of different names. Of course, I talked about Zion Tracy. He makes sense for another defensive back there. The defensive back class looks pretty great as long as they can keep Dakari Nelson and some of those other guys on board, which I think they will. So I still see a class with another 4 or 5 commitments. And then, again, if there's some elite guys towards the end, especially after coaching changes shuffle around, then they can probably find room to go a little bit above that 23 number, which is the number that makes the most sense before you have to start making hard decisions and going over that 85 limit.
Right. Yeah. And of course, the transfer portal, some spots I'm sure will be saved for that as well, as Penn State has done a pretty good job of finding at least a couple of players each cycle since the portal really became a big thing there. So we will see. But Ryan, there's no doubt about it. There's been some, if you were going to sum up the summer, I think you'd call it a
roller coaster.
A roller coaster. Yeah. I mean, Penn State did get some wins. There's no doubt, but there's a lot of guys. If you went back and watched the BWI Daily from late May or early June, or if you read any of the recruiting updates at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com over that period of time, there's a lot of guys who were on those lists and it's mentioned in those shows who were uncommitted that are now committed to somewhere that's not Penn State. So certainly some rebuilding of some position boards in this class needs to be done. And yeah, when you talk about the offensive line, there just doesn't seem to be a great jumping off point right now. So time will tell. Some guys pop up late. Some guys have good senior film, but this could also very well be something we don't know much about until December and maybe a little bit even later than that. Yeah,
well, look, they got 8 commitments this summer. I don't want to overlook that. Especially pulling in a Tomarrion Parker. None of us saw that coming until about right after the visit when I started catching word that he was going to commit. Dakari Nelson, I think we saw that, but I thought Dakari really wanted to wait to take more visits. And now, of course, he goes to Ole Miss too. Yep. So I'm starting to think he might. I don't think that Ole Miss maybe will be his only visit. We'll see, because that was always his plan, and then he kind of, I don't want to say rush it, but he went against his original thought process, I guess you would say. But Tyreek Landing, of course, and who am I missing there? Oh, King Mack, of course, and then of course that July run with London, Elliott, and the 2 linebackers and Tamir and Tony. All of those guys, I mean, almost all of those guys are 4-star players. I think Tyreek Landing, the only one of those. I think that's a 3-star. So that's a great run. Yeah. But again, since mid-July, the Jason Moore news, and since then we're kind of going back down there, and they're missing a lot of guys. So maybe they'll get a surprise here in August, but I expect the next 21 days or so to be pretty quiet on 2023 and 2024, and then we'll get visit list again, and I'm sure we'll see a couple of those on the field commitments that Franklin was doing with the guys last year. I wouldn't be shocked at all. I honestly wouldn't be shocked at all if that's Zion Tracy that first game. So. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a pretty slow 3 weeks here, though. Guys are focusing on their season. I'll go out and watch some practices later on. But as far as real news popping up in Penn State's favor, I just don't see anything right now. Taylor's going to probably go elsewhere. Kavion Keys is probably going to go elsewhere. I'm sure I'm missing somebody else in that mix too. But we'll see. Jalen Thompson.
All right. Yeah. Well, we'll try and have some better news for Penn State fans on the recruiting front next time, which I think will be a couple weeks, at least 1 week before we chat again here. Yeah. I know you're getting some downtime here as things slow down, so that's a plus. But perhaps next time we speak, Ryan, there'll be more good news to share, along with some other updates about some of the guys we've mentioned here. But until then, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I'm going next time. Our next recruiting show will be the 23rd, so I'm heading to the beach. Play with my kids for week and a half, a little over a week. So we will be gone then. T Frank and I will do a 2024 recap of the defense here later in the week as well. But like I said, it's just going to be a quiet. I mean, look, they put this dead period in because it was just kind of good for everybody. This wasn't always a dead period. Yeah, there were times where prospects could come up and watch a couple practices, but coaches want to focus on their teams. Like they don't get enough time with that. That's the whole reason we have a February dead period now, because they need time to recap the season, focus on their teams, focus on their development. And this August one is pretty similar. It just recruiting has taken, and recruiting has always been incredibly important, but now it's just so hectic with all the messaging and all those kind of things that you have to do daily. So adding more and more visits when you really need to be focusing on your team. Like I said, that's why these dead periods are in place. So pretty quiet 21 days coming up, I expect. But as I always say, now I'm running my mouth on YouTube, something's probably going to come up.
Well, remember, you can find all of our BWI Daily shows on YouTube at Blue White Illustrated, youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated, rather. You can find the podcast wherever you get your audio, Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher, where audio platforms are found. You will find us. And, of course, if it's just $1 to join BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for 1 year of access to all the insider notes you need as Penn State gets ready for Purdue. So for Ryan Snyder, I'm Greg Pickel. We will catch you next time on the BWI Daily Recruiting Show.